Dabi from My Hero Academia is one of the most overpowered and also misunderstood characters in the entire story. And so, today me and my good buddy Outlet decided that we would take it upon ourselves to see what a hypothetical world would look like where Cremation was not only the focal point of the story, but actually the main point of it, by giving it to a character which we can all agree low-key deserved to have a flame quirk in the first place. But I'm getting ahead of myself, so let me back up for a second and let you guys know that though part 1 is going to be on this video, that doesn't mean the movie's going to drop here, because that is actually going to be dropping on Saturday on Anime Outlet's channel, because like I said at the beginning, this video is a collab. So ladies and gentlemen, like with my other videos, if you guys go on to enjoy this one, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, turn on those notifications, and hit the hype button. Apparently it does really good things for the YouTube algorithm. But with no further ado, enjoy. We begin our story with the birth of Izuku alongside a young Todoroki, because in this timeline, Deku's going to be born into the Todoroki family household, which only makes sense considering the type of quirk that Deku's going to be born with. And this now probably has you wondering, okay, so what is this going to mean for Deku? Does he basically just grow up as Todoroki's twin? And to answer that question, basically, that's pretty much what's going to happen. And now here's the point where a lot of you guys are like, okay, so Deku's probably going to be neglected while Todoroki gets trained up really well. And originally that is what I was going to do, but after giving it a bit more thought and delving into the actual Dabi storyline, I figured that there was a little bit more stuff that we could do with it. So instead, we're actually going to be having a little bit of a jump cut moment where we're going to cut to the exact day when Toya was trying to get Endeavor to see his training and would have ignored him. This ultimately leads the young Toya to freaking out and trying to kill Shoto in the original story, but in this timeline, not only does he try to use his cremation quirk on Toya, but also on Izuku, who would be being held by his mother in this moment. Endeavor would stop his son, commanding him to never train this quirk again, but as Toya would go to do so once again in the forest, Toya would die, quote unquote, in the freak accident that would take him away from the family. This originally would lead Endeavor down a crazy path where he just starts treating Todoroki way different, and it's just not fun for anybody. However, one day, as Endeavor would have basically been in his first year of just acting like an absolute maniac, everything would change. Because on this particular day, Izuku would finally awaken his quirk, one of which Endeavor assumed was simply going to be another ice quirk. But when Deku awakened it, it would stun the entire family to find out that it was actually Cremation, the same quirk of the late Toya. And Endeavor seeing this, his eyes would practically go white as he falls to his knees and pretty much asks Izuku to get near him. As he stares at him, Endeavor would think to himself that this is a second chance. He now has been given the opportunity to raise Toya once again. Feeling sorry for the loss of his son that he feels responsible for deep down, Endeavor decides that not only is he going to be training Todoroki, but also Izuku. Meaning that for the next couple of years, Endeavor would go through a very, very big character change in which he would try to be a better father and a better mentor towards them. And since Todoroki in this timeline would not grow up training only by himself, being treated like absolute garbage, like he's the only chance he has, Endeavor would actually be like a kind of half decent dad. Mind you, neither of them are going to be sitting there writing home about how incredible Endeavor is, but it's to the point where Todoroki doesn't hate his father in this timeline, and that's more than you can ask for. Because with Deku and Todoroki growing up together, doing the same training basically every day, they would get pretty damn efficient by using their quirks, each of them discovering their weaknesses, their strengths, and everything else in between, which all would culminate on the day that Toya would finally return to his family. If you guys have seen the latter seasons of My Hero, you would know that Toya actually tried to return to the household, but when seeing that Endeavor was actually training Todoroki and was doing exactly what he had begged him to do for so long, something just broke inside of Toya, which is still going to be happening in this timeline, but he's not only going to be seeing Todoroki be trained, but his other younger brother, Izuku Todoroki, who was wielding the exact same flame quirk that he was, and at that age that he was at, his flames were already blue. This would light a fire, see what I did there, inside of Dabi's heart, which would lead him down the same maniacal path that he would go down plotting his revenge and developing a hate for not only Todoroki and Endeavor, but honestly most of all for Deku, viewing him as a thief, the person responsible for stealing the life that he should have had, which would ultimately boil his blood and lead to the next arcs that happen in the series being a little crazy to say the least. That said, as the two boys would grow up, their childhoods would be a lot different. Todoroki would grow up less as that kind of quiet kid that thinks he's better than everybody or has like daddy issues, and more so as straight up just a more family. This means that two things will change. One, the Endeavor household will not be crazy broken apart. There's still a bit of tension and conflict within it because of the way that Endeavor is going to be to his other kids, and he's not going to be the nicest to Rei, which is their mother. However, due to that means that Todoroki's never going to be developing the eye scar, and with no eye scar, that means that their mother Rei would actually grow up alongside of them, never being taken to that psychiatric ward with Endeavor, playing a hand in that. So, Deku would grow up to have a much different personality in this timeline, having his flame quirk, one that actually actively surpasses his younger brother, who was the so-called prodigy of the family, and would actually be more than capable of just melting through Todoroki's ice, which leads Deku to develop a more confident personality, more of like an outlandish kind of character, and definitely not going to be introverted in this timeline, and due to the fact that he wouldn't be bullied, but instead would actually quite literally be very popular in his class, with his brother, this means that each of them would have absolutely zero like social interaction problems, and we instead get a more similar version of Todoroki that we do at the end of the story, one that isn't quiet but one that also isn't loud. He's like a perfect mixture, which is kind of ironic considering half hot, half cold. All the while Deku is all the way like a little bit more obnoxious because he's all hot, he's all fired up, But yeah, that pretty much sums up the entirety of their childhood, which means that we're now able to get to the point when both of them finally go to take the entrance exam, which for the purposes of this what if, they're going to be taking the recommendation exam for two reasons. One, bro, they're literally them, and two, they're the sons of Endeavor, so there's no way they're going to go through the normal test, meaning that we get to watch them go through an obstacle course that is very, very intricate, might I add, and we get to see them taking the written exam, which Deku would do a little bit better than Todoroki on, just because even though he's more loudmouth, that doesn't mean that he would still be dumb in this timeline. And so, with both brothers passing and finally making it to their first days of UA, the two boys would be dropped off at the school by Endeavor personally, who would give them like a bit of a head nod, both boys doing the same and promising that one day, one of them will become the #1 hero. Deku saying that that spot's already as good as his, saying that he'll do this for Toya, lifting one arm up as both boys would finally make their way into the classroom. Once there, Deku would do a bit of a double take looking around at the classroom to see who he's going to be with for the next couple of years. And spotting his classmates, Deku would start taking mental notes of who his, crush is going to be for the class. As Deku finally sitting down would then turn towards his brother, asking how he feels. Todoroki telling him that he feels good. He says he feels like he belongs. This is when suddenly an argument would break out between Ida and Bakugo, where Bakugo would be like, "Who died and made you king, huh?" All the while Ida would say, "Get your legs off of UA property. This is very important stuff, and I will not be allowing you to distress this school." All the while Aizawa in the background would have been woken up by this, and he would wake up to pretty much tell both of them to shut up and sit down. This is when Aizawa would go on to break down the rules of what they're actually going to be having go on here, and as everybody would listen to this, they would all make their way outside getting ready to take the Quirk apprehension test. This would almost immediately be followed by Aizawa turning his attention to Bakugo and tossing him a baseball. Then he would order him to toss it as far as he physically can, as Bakugo smiling would say, "Sure." This is when balling it up and giving it some backspin, he would throw that thing, launching it with an explosion, his most powerful one, causing recoil to go through his arm, as Bakugo would have sent that thing flying like 800 meters, shocking the entirety of the class, who would all be like, "Wait, he just did that?" And leaving a bunch of them to start having those "this is so cool" reactions, which ultimately leave Aizawa to say, "Alright, if this is so cool, then whoever comes in last place, that person will be expelled," making everybody just immediately lock in, as Deku, being the last one to go up, would end up smirking, thinking to himself that this is the perfect opportunity to show off what he has. He'll throw in some firepower and blow that cocky bastard Bakugo out of the water. As he would spin the ball, Deku would shoot at Cremation flame so damn hot, as Deku would swing his arm as hard as possible, but due to the nature of his quirk, he would end up getting 100 meters below Bakugo, kind of like stomping on the ground and being like, damn it, grabbing at his hair, leading to Todoroki staring at him and being like, dude, are you serious? And the rest of the class to be staring at him. Deku in this moment would feel kind of bad, kind of like looking down, doing the whole like walk of shame, as we then watch them taking the next events, Deku thinking to himself that he needs to like regain that aura. Doing so immediately during the 50-meter dash, where Deku almost instantaneously would rip a book straight out of Bakugo's page, shooting flames from the back of his hands, all the while simultaneously engulfing both of his feet like the Adola burst with flames, pushing himself forward and running at a pretty decent pace. This would impress some of his classmates, with them thinking that that's so cool, as Deku would get an average score on the grip strength, use his flames to bypass the entirety of the standing long jump by propelling himself into the air like the Human Torch, and then do the repeated side-to-side steps by using flames on his legs and hands, shooting flames to the left then shooting flames to the right, all the while simultaneously doing like a little bit of a jab step with each foot and using his flames. This would get him a pretty impressive score, ultimately getting us to the final 3 tests, which would be a punching machine, push-ups, and sit-ups, with Deku doing pretty good in the push-ups and sit-ups department, but doing incredibly well during the punch, seeing as Deku was capable of lighting his fist ablaze and then BAM! Whacking it with a pretty decently strong punch. A lot of the people watching would think that they would not want to get hit with that, not because of the power output, but because of what happened to the mat after it was hit by it. It was cremated, and safe to say, that looked really freaking gnarly to the guys in Class 1A, which leaves some of them to be like, dude, that was so freaking cool. All the while Bakugo would go next and slam an explosion into the mat, burning it, but not to the same degree that Deku would have, as Deku would kind of give like a little bit of a smirk to Bakugo, who would give like a pissed off look, just kind of rolling his eyes. This is when we would then get into what happens after this, which would pretty much just be the ranking system, where it would be discovered that Deku and Todoroki ended up placing among the top 3, with Momo Yaoyorozu being up there with them as well, just due to the versatility of her quirk. This would piss off Bakugo, who during the first event would have kind of like given a smirk at Deku, and seeing as he ended up coming in right behind him, he would not be pretty happy, because Izuku would have ended up getting 3rd place and Bakugo would have came in 5th. Or 4th, whichever one you really want to think, but I think 5th would fit better for Bakugo in this timeline. That said, when the day would be over, the 2 boys would end up finally making it home, where they would pretty much sit at the dinner table, which is very rare for the normal timeline, and just go on and on about how cool UA was, Deku talking about how he showed up this one kid in class who thought he was all that after one cool performance. Todoroki ends up rolling his eyes, saying, yeah, they did pretty good, eventually teasing Deku and being like, yeah, I saw who you had your eyes on. Deku kind of going bright red as he'd be like, shut up, dude. And Endeavor would get up on the table being like, Shoto, who is she? With Todoroki being like, oh, her name is, Deku's just pretty much like slamming Todoroki on the ground with his mouth covering his, his hands covering his mouth. Todoroki, like kind of like uses his quirk a little bit, freezing Deku's hand. This is when both boys would start getting into like a tug of war on the ground, as all the rest of the siblings around them would start laughing, and Endeavor sitting back down on his seat would have a very like pleased smile, just seeing that his family was in a place that he never thought they would be at just a couple short years ago. The birth of Todoroki and Deku was literally God's sent gift to him, and he's pretty happy about them. Right now, he's not thinking about, oh, I'm the number 2 hero, or I'm the number 1 hero. He's thinking, they are my heroes, and that would be the biggest change that would come from this story. But continuing forth with what actually happens in the timeline of events, we now get into the following day at school, with everybody pretty much being in the cafeteria getting all of their lunches, as Deku would be sitting down next to Todoroki, Kirishima, Ochako, and Ida, all of them kind of just talking amongst themselves about why they wanted to become heroes. And once lunch would finally be over and they would all get back to class, they would all be patiently waiting for Aizawa to walk through the door. But what they wouldn't expect is All Might, the literal symbol of peace himself, to burst through the door just being like, I am here, coming in through the door like a normal person, going on to just straight up talk to them about how he's going to be one of their teachers and explain that these are their costumes, clicking a button on a random remote on his waist, as suddenly the wall right next to them that they had thought had nothing special about it would all turn to reveal the coolest costumes ever, with Deku and Todoroki suiting up with their own, and Deku having a costume kind of similar to what Dabi wears, kind of like a little bit of like a white trench coat looking thing that would match his hair, all the while Todoroki would get into more of like his season 3 costume, where he doesn't look like a complete fool. And so with that being the case, we kind of just watch on as the students just eagerly wait for All Might to explain what they're going to be doing today. Some of them being worried about whether they're going to get expelled today, with All Might just bursting their whole bubble and just being like, nah, don't worry about that. I promise I don't run things like Aizawa. He would then go on to tell them that they're going to be participating in a mock battle, where each of them are going to be paired in groups of 2, and they're going to be doing an event called the Heroes versus Villains trial, where essentially it's the hero's job to capture the villains in this capture tape or render them unconscious, while it's the villain's job to stop them from getting to the bomb by all means necessary. Laughing as he would say this, before going on to tell them that really, they need to use as much force as they believe is required, telling them to use their own judgment to see whether how much damage they can do to their classmates. This would leave a couple of them to ask, aren't they going to get any real training before this? With All Might saying that UA prefers to just do a little bit of a throwing them into the fire type of approach, with the class just being like, alright, and some of them getting stoked. This is when a random name generator would be pressed on by All Might, as the first team to get paired up together would be Izuku and Todoroki, both boys being completely stunned at the fact that on their second day of school, they get to showcase what they can do as a duo, which is going to be incredible considering the fact that Deku and Todoroki, have been kind of training together their whole lives. They're basically that incredible duo at Fortnite or like a video game that you just don't want to run into. And unfortunately for Mineta and Kaminari, who would have the misfortune of being paired up against them, that's exactly who they would have to fight, with both of them being assigned to the hero role and Deku and Todoroki being assigned the villains. As soon as this event would start, Deku would start stretching out his limbs as he would tell Todoroki to maybe not freeze the whole building. Todoroki smiling, as almost instantaneously, he would freeze the top level, just kind of alerting to the other team where the bomb room's at, with Kaminari and Mineta just being scared as they would go up there, knowing that those two are clearly freaking strong. And they have freaking chemistry, Mineta would be saying, all the while they'd be climbing up the hall, with Mineta saying, you don't think we can just quit on this, right? I mean, we'll at least stop ourselves from getting burned or frozen. Embarrassment can't be that bad, can it, Kaminari? With Kaminari saying, I would say so, but there's a total babe that I want to impress, so I can't really look too manly if I just go wimping out. You got me? So here's what we're gonna do. We're clearly on the floor that we need to be on, and we're gonna open each door. We'll take turns. I open it, you open the next. And there's 6 doors here, so one of us has to get the door right. Whoever opens it is likely going to get hit with a full force attack, so the other person is going to have to use their quirk to bomb rush them. You ready, Mineta? Mineta would be like, no, as he opens the door, and almost immediately bro gets frozen into a block of solid ice, with Mineta having this terrified face expression on his face, just being like, help, like at that last moment, shocking Kaminari, who would fear for his life and begin to run out, with Deku smirking, as almost instantly flame bursts would shoot out from his feet, and he would shoot a burst of flames at the wall, melting through the concrete wall itself, as staring down Kaminari, who was currently running through the hallways, would turn around seeing Deku in a poorly lit room, as suddenly a pillar of flame would be shot out towards his direction, and next thing he knew it, he would be inside of Recovery Girl's office. All the while the rest of the class would go on to take their events, and it would be very clear that the best team was clearly Izuku and Todoroki, who finished their match in 8 minutes, but only due to the fact that the other team took forever to get to them. They played their role as perfect as possible. They protected the bomb, and the other team didn't even get one step into the room before they were taken out. So safe to say, they're the MVPs of the day. That said, as class would end, both boys would be walking home as suddenly looking up at the sky, they would see a billboard ad, as Deku would read it just going, follow Xehther's second channel? Link in description, where Xehther's going to be talking about the Bible, reading the Bible, and going through the gospel Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. What? Y'all remember that Christian channel I said I was going to make? I finally did it. So if you guys are interested in that type of content, or you guys would like to hear the gospel or the message of Jesus, you can find that link down below in my description. But self-plug aside, let's get back into the story. This would then lead us into the events of the next week, which after all the students would get their permission slips lined for the USJ event, all of the students would be boarding the bus, where a conversation would break out about who the strongest in the classroom is. Deku just blatantly announcing that he's the strongest. I'm the strongest, it's no contest. As Todoroki would say, in your dreams, I'm the strongest. And Bakugo would say, what? You two losers think you get to say you're the strongest? There's no way you would have been able to take me down the way you took down those 2 losers back there, pointing looking at Kaminari and Mineta, who would both be like, what did we do to catch those strays? All the while Deku would laugh, and the rest of the class would laugh as well. This is when, arriving just outside the USJ, all of the students would exit only to see the pro hero 13, with Uraraka being like, oh, that's my favorite hero, and Deku looking at her and just being like, really, why's that? As she would explain why she likes the hero 13, and Todoroki would kind of give like shoulder nugs to the direction of Deku, him kind of going a little bit red, as eventually 13 would be like, hey, you two back there, please pay attention. Going back to explain the boring lecture, when out of nowhere a Mistgate portal would appear at the center of the USJ, and a voice would echo out of it. Sorry for crashing the party, heroes, but it appears we weren't invited, as multiple Warp Gate portals would begin to appear all over the USJ and drop a multitude of villains, with the main one dropping Shigaraki and the Nomu, as well as a horde of over 60 criminals. This leaves the hero 13 to telling the class to back up, as almost instantly Bakugo and Kirishima lunge to the direction of the villain, but being warped away by Kurogiri, who would dodge their attacks, he would then go on to begin warping everyone away, with Deku shooting a pillar of flames, or sorry, not a pillar, but a beam of flames at the direction of Kurogiri, and Kurogiri opening a Warp Gate portal, actually reversing it, sending it flying at his classmates. This would opt 13 to use her black hole quirk, as she would suck the flames into her quirk and then aim it at Kurogiri. But doing the same thing that he had done to Izuku, Kurogiri would take the hero 13 out, leaving Ida to make his escape, as he would teleport the rest of the students away, Todoroki being sent to the landslides part, as Izuku would land in the middle of water, being saved by Suyu's tongue, which would grapple him and throw him on top of the bus, or sorry, not bus, but boat. This is when Deku, wet, would end up pretty much like wringing out his hair, as he would ask the two of them what they can do to help in this situation. Mineta saying, what do you mean help? You expect me to go down there and fight those things? With Suyu, just looking at him and being like, why did you come into the hero course? Mineta being like, you can't call me a scaredy cat. You guys are the weirdos. How are you guys not freaking out? We haven't even made it 3 weeks into UA and you already expect me to fight villains? With Deku being like, fair point. As looking downwards and seeing that the villains were coming towards him, Deku would say that they have no choice though. As aiming one hand into the water, Deku would start shooting his flames directly into it, heating it up as though he was boiling the water on a stove. And with this working pretty damn fast, the villains would immediately swim out of the water, practically being boiled alive like a freaking lobster, leaving the students to make it to the shore, where Izuku, using both hands to create like a flaming cremation wing attack, he would shoot it at the direction of them, taking all of them out immediately. As Deku, noting that Aizawa was currently facing off against a ton of villains, he would turn towards Suyu and Mineta, telling them to go with the others, as he would say that he'll help Aizawa. Mineta calling him crazy, as Izuku would make the lunge over there, engulfing both feet on fire, as rushing towards the direction of Aizawa, Izuku, using his cremation quirk, would start burning a few of the villains, with Shigaraki watching with a smile going, so you think a little fire's gonna stop the villains? Well, why don't you try those attacks on the Nomu? As he would cry out, Nomu, kill the brat. This is when suddenly the Nomu come flying at the direction of Deku, would end up throwing a crazy powerful punch, which would be stopped and tanked, most of it at least, by a pillar of ice that would suddenly appear, meaning that though the punch would slightly graze Deku, it wouldn't do as much damage and would only send him back 10 feet, giving him to realize that if he gets hit by that thing, he's dead. Though, luckily, he has Aizawa and Todoroki by his side, and Izuku feels confident that they can take this behemoth down. So, turning towards Todoroki and screaming, "Position A1!" Both of them would get into the perfect synchronized position, as flames would be sent towards the direction of the Nomu, Deku shooting them out in the position of the Masenko that Gohan uses, as flames would start charring the Nomu, but its body would regenerate faster than they can burn it. And with that being the case, the two boys would practically be playing cat and mouse with the Nomu, with Shigaraki getting pissed off as more and more seconds pass, ultimately leaving him to say, "Kurogiri, why don't you help the Nomu out a bit?" Teleporting Aizawa towards a different section of the battlefield, greatly increasing the Nomu's strength since now it had access to the rest of his quirks, as Kurogiri would then go on to open a Warp Gate portal, which leaves the Nomu the opportunity to punch square at the direction of Todoroki, his fist going straight through the portal and grabbing at the neck of Todoroki, screeching, all the while the rest of the Nomu's body would be on the other side of a portal. And Deku, seeing that Todoroki was currently getting choked and his face was turning red and blood was starting to pour out of his nose, Deku would lunge on top of the Nomu, grabbing onto it by its back, as Deku pouring as much flames as he can to the Nomu's cranium, literal brain area. Deku would scream, "Die!" But the Nomu would squeeze tighter and tighter on Todoroki, with the Shigaraki smiling and being like, "Ha, guess your brother there's gonna pop like a balloon." Just kind of doing like a stereotypical villain laugh, with Deku being like, "No!" Like having like a very stereotypical anime power-up moment, as Deku's flames power up way more than they ever have before, just absolutely frying the Nomu's brain, leaving the smell of charred brain matter in the air, as the Nomu's fist would suddenly stop crushing Todoroki, and it would be made very apparent that Deku was pushing his quirk beyond its limits, because his body was starting to overheat, but Deku wasn't stopping, because in his eyes, Todoroki was still in danger, and because of the bright light of his quirk, he wasn't able to see whether his brother was fine, so he was pushing crazy levels of heat that normally could like quite literally kill someone, until suddenly Todoroki, waving his left hand towards his direction, would freeze Deku, leaving him to recognize that his brother was okay, as he would stop the flames and the effects of the burning that were happening on his body would be stopped from getting any worse. This is when Todoroki, looking to the direction of Deku, would tell him that he's insane, to never try something like that again. Did he forget what happened to Toya? With Deku telling him that he would have if it meant Todoroki would have been okay. Him smiling as Deku would suddenly be bomb rushed by Shigaraki, who would say, "That's enough, heroes!" rushing in an attempt to decay Deku, as suddenly, bam, the symbol of peace would arrive. All Might in all of his glory would knock Shigaraki clean out, as he would stare at the direction of Kurogiri menacingly, with the villain warping away, knowing that he simply couldn't help in that moment, and teleporting right next to All for One, informing him of the fact that his protege was taken by the heroes, which ultimately leaves a disgrimaced All for One to say, it should be fine, he'll be out within the month, leaving everybody in the USJ to finally take a moment to take in what's happening around them, as All Might would question the two boys on what happened, them explaining that they were fighting alongside Aizawa when suddenly that purple mist thing teleported him away and they had to pull out all the stops to beat that thing, pointing to the Nomu, which head is completely charred, it's just black, and there was no regenerating from the Nomu. All Might saying that they defeated that thing, with both of them nodding, him kind of pulling both of them in for like a bit of a hug, as he would say that he's glad that the next generation of heroes has people this skilled and talented, before then grabbing the unconscious Shigaraki and taking him into a police van. This is when they would take note of everything that happened here, as they would pretty much file down police reports, and we would then get a 1 week break where the students having some time to, decompress after these events, until eventually, once they would return to school, the students would all be told about the UA Sports Festival, all getting excited, with Deku and Todoroki of course knowing about this, since Endeavor had pretty much told them to let the world know that they're here and they're going to be taking that #1 spot, which each of them would be super eager to do, starting with the first event, which would be the obstacle course, where Deku would finally have the chance to deploy a special move he's been working on. He's been doing a little bit of studying his father and the way that he maneuvers, and he finally came up with a cool little idea of his own, having a little bit better of an ability to manipulate flames due to the fact that he's been working on them since he was like 3 years old. And so, the moment that the test would be announced and the starter's pistol would blow, Deku would instantly jump up into the air, knowing his brother was going to freeze everyone around him, as flaming wings would appear behind his back, and as the wings would flap, a light would engulf the area that they were in, with everybody kind of covering their faces as though the sun was beaming down on them at full force on like the hottest day of the year, as Deku would fly, shocking Todoroki and everybody else, with a new skill that Deku would whip that out of seemingly nowhere, which mind you, allows him flight, but doesn't give him like crazy levels of speed. He's basically keeping up with the likes of Bakugo right now, who would be using his own explosion quirk to shoot fire propelling himself, which Deku would have the perfect idea to combine both elements, the wings and shooting flames from his hands and feet. This could give him the edge that he needs. So, in an aerial battle against Bakugo, Deku and Bakugo would be going at it, Todoroki slightly behind them, with Todoroki kind of smirking and also also being a little bit like ticked at the fact that he kept that from him. This, however, is when they would approach the 0 pointers, and Bakugo would say, "Die! Get out of my way, 0 pointers!" As one of them would be blown to bits. Deku would shoot a flaming arrow similar to the ones that his father uses, as Todoroki would freeze 3 robots, causing them to all fall down. This is when all 3 frontrunners, alongside Ida, who would be closing the gap between them using his engine quirk, would all be inching closer and closer to the finish line, when Deku finally pulls out the ultimate move, shooting flames from his hands and feet, propelling himself to move 1.5 times faster than he was already moving, creating a gap big enough that none of them could even contest Deku's victory. And with him having discovered this new ability, we would see a proud Endeavor up in the stands, just going out, "Shoto! Give it your all in the next one." All the while Deku would smirk at Todoroki, and Todoroki would have a little bit of like a rolling my eyes moment. This is when, as everybody would arrive to the finish line, Bakugo would stare at Deku, giving him a glare and telling him not to get too cocky, that in the 1v1 battles he's gonna wipe the floor with him, and make sure his dear old dad over there watches as he slowly tears him to shreds, pissing off Deku, who at this moment would literally have his eyes engulf into flames as he asks, "The hell you just say to me, you pyrotechnic wannabe?" With Todoroki grabbing his shoulder and be like, "Not now, you know you can't fight him. You'll get yourself and probably me expelled too." Deku staring at Todoroki as he would look at Bakugo and tell him to make sure that he at least makes it to the 3rd round. Because if he can somehow manage that, then either he or his brother here will have the privilege of whipping him a new one. This is when a pissed off Bakugo would smirk, saying, "I'd like to see you try." And ladies and gentlemen, with that being said, that concludes my part for What If Deku Had Cremation. Which, by the way, you guys are going to be able to find the entire full movie to this video on Saturday in Anime Outlet's channel, which, by the way, will be linked down below in the description, and I'll probably have him be the pinned comment, which on Saturday I'll probably end up having him update it to actually have the link of the full movie video. So yeah, just wait a couple of days, and I promise the wait will be worth it, because we already planned out this story, and it is a banger of a video, let me tell you guys that. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, that's been it for me today. I hope that you guys end up watching the full movie on his channel, and with nothing else from me, have a wonderful day. Peace.
Hey, you made it to the end of the video. Like it or die!
That wasn't the line, Kachan!
Whatever.